Thank you, everyone. We're very excited for this session right before lunch. And also let everyone know we have an awesome resiliency workshop. Please be sure to stop by, grab some food, then head on there. We got a great session led by Bruna and Schaefer, his team. But next up, we have an awesome conversation here to lead us into the next phase. I'd like to welcome up Ricky Murray to talk about our next panel on community resilience. Ricky, come on up.
I'm excited. Jason's allowing me to sit in a chair now instead of standing the whole time talking to all of you. But I would love to introduce you to our next panel. We have, it's a fireside chat actually, with two people who I'm very familiar with who are really active in the industry, and we can't wait to have a conversation with you today. So please help me in introducing DeAnna Hardwick, Executive Vice President of Customer Strategy at CPS Energy, and Lincoln Blevins, Executive Director of Sustainability and Energy Management at Stanford University. All right, thanks for joining us, both of you. DeAnna, let's actually just kick it off with you. Tell us a little bit about what you do at CPS Energy and what's going on in San Antonio.
Thanks, Ricky. So I am the Executive Vice President for Customer Strategy, and the best way I usually explain to people what that means is everything customer and community. I always say that I'm the customer girl, but I am excited to see more females in the room. So, but at CPS Energy, we are a municipally owned utility in San Antonio. San Antonio is the biggest small town. We're like seventh largest in the nation, and people continue to grow, so we're one of the fastest growing communities. At the same time, equity is a big challenge in our community. So when we talk about equity, we have 20% of our customers that are probably have a rate burden, energy burden, about 10%, or more in some cases. And that's only going to continue to grow with the fuel prices and the costs that we've seen. So the more we talk about the right rate structure, the better off we are. We also are part of the ERCOT market energy grid, and we're going through our generation planning now. And all of that is going to be centered around community conversations. So making sure that we're engaging with partners, stakeholders, having real conversations, what technology is currently available, what technology is coming, and make sure that we're planning for how we are in line with our city's climate action plan goals, and just taking care of our community. Community keeps telling you, I know all of the utility people here know, the things that customers care about. They want their lights to stay on, and they want it to be affordable. And if you can do those two things, then make it environmentally friendly. But especially since Winter Storm Uri in Texas, the number one thing we have to do, keep the lights on. So we're continuing to focus on that through our generation planning, and then we'll go through affordability as we move through a rate redesign.
Awesome. It's great work that San Antonio is doing. And, you know, I think it takes a lot of planning and thought process, and there's like a certain educational component that comes along with it. So shifting to you, Lincoln, tell us a little bit about your work at Stanford University and what's going on over there.
Great. Lincoln Blevins from Stanford. Great to be here, and really honored to follow the panels this morning. I mean, just the amount of horsepower at this event is always amazing to me. I have the distinction of having the coolest job in the world, and I will fight anybody on that. I have spent about 30 years in the global energy industry and have just landed about a year and a half ago at Stanford, running really what is a small city full of incredibly high maintenance citizens. I like to joke that you throw a rock and you hit a Nobel Prize winner, but it's pretty close. And they have needs. But I get to run sustainability, resilience, energy up and down the value chain, water up and down the value chain, building energy management, both thermal and electric, as well as operational safety and emergency response. I've actually got a list in my head because I know I've forgotten something. But really all the things that are so top of mind and so much the subject of this conference, But at the same time, those things that most of us don't recognize or don't think about until they stop. So I have that kind of, high anxiety sort of job. But being at Stanford, we are really driven to both operationalize sustainability and resilience, which is incredibly impactful, but also to make the best solution for Stanford, and then use that solution and offer that solution as an exemplar, as a template for the rest of the world to copy. And we're doing that across energy and water and waste and resilience, sustainability. So, if I had more coffee and less need for sleep, I could do more. But in the meantime, again, I think I've got the coolest job in the world.
I'd agree. I could say that. So part of that is knowledge sharing. The knowledge sharing portion is probably the big key component there. And our session is titled Community-Led Resilience in an Era of Transformation. We know our industry's changing. It's happening quickly. Not-ish. So San Antonio's doing something interesting. You've partnered with San Antonio Water Systems. How has that helped with community outreach and the resiliency efforts that you're going through in San Antonio?
Yeah, I think during the pandemic, one of the biggest things that we saw was just people didn't know what to do, right? They didn't know who to go to for help. And also we found out that people didn't always remember what SAWS did, San Antonio Water System versus CPS Energy. And at the end of the day, it didn't matter. We all have ways to support each other. So I was very fortunate to start partnering with my counterpart over in the water system. We met weekly, and then we just started sharing what we were doing and finding ways to capitalize. So we couldn't do community fairs anymore because COVID, and so we started doing outreach to customers. We had to put a link and information together, mail out to customers. Here's where you can get help for CPS Energy. Here's also where you can get help for SAWS. And we have 100 other agency partners that we work with that can help you for anything. It's not just about utility bills. It's also about how do you get help with rent and things like that. But then as a result of the horrible winter storm that we had in 2021, Winter Storm Uri, our water system that had depended on our strong reliability at CPS Energy, it was gone, right? Just the challenges that we saw with the load shed and everything else. So they didn't always have a plan because our reliability was so good. They never thought about a time when power wouldn't be there for them. So I would say that one of the biggest things that we did is our board got with the board of SAWS, because we're two separate entities, even though we're both municipally owned, and said, how do we partner? So what energy plan do we need from a backup perspective? SAWS, what water plan do you need? And one of it is we couldn't go through a process of saying if you, for every place that we have key water pumps that we can, we couldn't exempt them from load shed. Right, because then we would not be able, then we would have an impact on ERCOT in the grid, right? So the next plan was how do we prioritize the water pump stations so that hospitals, the military, whoever it is, gets the water that they need, that we get the water that we need to continue to generate power, but at the same time that we're not excluding all of our circuits. So in working with SAWS, they went through a process to procure and install, or they're going to generators, so I have some resiliency for 15 different primary sites. And so one that's going to help us if we need to move load, they can move over to the backup. And in CPS Energy, so while SAWS owns it, CPS Energy is going to operate and maintain it. And it's also going to give us over 30 megawatts, and this is going to start next year, but by having that 30 megawatts, eventually that might be some additional power if we do this right, that we can put back on the grid, right? So, and how do we leverage that with additional technology? And that partnership has just been so huge, and we're continuing to work through it. We're not an expert in water, they're not an expert in power, but coming together because the community doesn't care. They just know they want their lights to work and they want water whenever we're in a winter storm.
You're essentially creating your own water energy nexus of San Antonio.
That's absolutely right.
I love it. So Lincoln, you're in California. What are some ways that you think California is leading in this same effort when it comes to resiliency for customers?
Well, I think it starts with a mindset. I moved to actually LA right after Superstorm Sandy. We had a 6-day outage where I lived in the kind of the exurbs of New York, and that was as easy as anybody had it, but it really put a very, very sharp exclamation point on the wrath of Mother Nature. I have this image of Mother Nature kind of getting angry and turning into the Incredible Hulk, and of course, you don't like her when you don't like the Hulk when he or she is angry. That created a mindset in the Northeast that I think was not quite there yet. California, the mindset is different. California is the most remarkable place when it comes to vulnerability to climate events and earthquakes. So I think the mindset is different here, and thus people are a little bit readier to be reactive, not reactive, reactive is the wrong word, to be prepared and to roll with things maybe a tiny bit more. That said, I think what we're seeing, earthquakes are earthquakes, but what we're seeing from a climate perspective is an increased frequency that is frankly catching people by surprise. Just in Palo Alto, which has one of the most temperate climates of any place on Earth, a very hot day in the summer has gone from the low 80s to the low 100s in a matter of years, not tens of years, years. Step changes in precipitation patterns, step changes in temperature patterns. So with that, I think we're maybe a little bit psychologically readier in California, but it's coming at us maybe faster than we're currently ready for.
So this is as we're going through this transformation, it clearly includes a lot of people besides just water utilities or energy utilities. DeAnna, in San Antonio, y'all have some very creative partnerships that you've worked out. Can you tell us a little bit about how the San Antonio community and your partnerships are maybe out of the norm a little bit, and what those partnerships look like?
Yes, so one thing is how do we bring the city of San Antonio, who's our owner, as well as SAWS, together with other community leaders. So we started looking at our large commercial users or influencers in our community. And we wanted to build a conservation network that was a little bit different. So, we have the demand response program. We have so many other ways to help reduce conservation, to improve conservation, reduce the load, but we needed something a little bit more. So we went to, as well as the city and SAWS, San Antonio is one of the largest military towns. So my largest customer is military. So I've got a couple of Air Force bases and an Army base. And so it's talking to the Joint Base San Antonio groups and saying, hey, we're going to need your help for this. And then also talking to, like I said, influencers in San Antonio. From a customer experience standpoint, we have two really big shining stars of who those are, and that's USAA from insurance. They're headquartered in San Antonio. And then for those of you who live in Texas, HEB, that people are just completely passionate about because of the customer experience that they provide. And so HEB, being a good community partner, is part of this consortium to how do we build out folks that we can call upon in a moment to proactively go on their backup programs. And then like with HEB, we have set up we work with a third-party resiliency company that helps them manage that they don't have to lose food in the event of any outage that they have. It allowed them to have stores that stayed open during Winter Storm Uri, which was extremely important. But it also allows them to have a backup plan and say, we're going to shut down the bakery today. And so, not everybody needs cookies during a winter storm, but people probably need water, so how do we stay open? So that has allowed us to help improve the load. So when we think about the impact and the difference that made over the summer, whenever we were getting close to coming to different events from a ERCOT perspective, CPS Energy, I think we make up like 6% of the generation for the state of Texas. But we were able to reduce the load. So when the demand response request came out, by leveraging this network, we were, I think, 40 to 50% of the load reduction just by using this network as well as our other demand response networks.
People in Texas love H-E-B. I'm one of them. H-E-B is the best grocery store, and I could argue with all of you about this. But it's interesting because, we know energy is a necessity, water is a necessity, so is food, and partnering with, those organizations, I think, definitely helps push that needle forward.
I just wanted to add a tiny bit to that. We just had a significant outage at Stanford, just the campus, in June, 3.5 days. It hit us in the Achilles heel of our power system, and the lights went out. And one of the things that we've found in the aftermath of that is thinking about it less from a utility side preparedness challenge and a utility side response challenge to a more holistic view, including the customers, as you mentioned. How can the customers make themselves ready? How can the customers put themselves into a position where they can respond? That's a new mentality for a lot of folks. I think the utilities in particular they've kind of been everything to everybody for so long, and these challenges that we're facing are as much about customer behavior and customer action and inaction as they are about the utility side. And I think it's really interesting that you're seeing that too, that there is it really is a soup to nuts sort of challenge.
So tell us a little bit how Stanford or maybe some other universities are leading the way when it comes to building these resilient and sustainable universities. We've had a lot of discussion over the past 2 days about how the younger generation now cares way more about their utility. And so tell us kind of what's the university standpoint?
I'd like to say we're way out there and doing everything rationally and thoughtfully and proactively. But of course, we're human beings, so we're not very good at that. But we do see incredible opportunities here. One of the things that I really love about Stanford is trying to make things great for Stanford, but then also provide templates for the rest of the world. And that, and really making those operationalizing, I think that's a word, sustainability and resilience. And when we look at what we're doing, whether it's housing students and feeding students and letting students run in the fountains, which they like to do, or maintaining research at the absolute top of the world-class level. We have experiments, whether they're cell lines or physics experiments, that literally have to be uninterrupted for a decade in some cases. Otherwise, you just have to start over. So there is an expectation and a need for not just reliability, but resilience, come what may. And so, this is, I'd like to say we're way ahead of this. It is an evolving conversation on the campus, but I think this last June power outage, never let a good crisis go to waste. This has really centered the conversation around preparedness. And so we are doing a soup to nuts all across campus, whether it's the research community or the operational staff or residential dining and housing, looking at everything with a fresh pair of eyes and literally opening up that box of MREs. We think it's not expired, but is it really not expired? Literally going down to that level, thinking about spare parts and inventory. What absolutely positively has to be within the campus? What can be across the bay? What can be somewhere else? What can be in a vendor's warehouse somewhere? All of those questions are starting to become going from the theoretical to the real. And I'd love to say we're way ahead on that, but we are certainly working hard on it.
So power outages, we know, those are likely to happen all the time. We just don't want them to happen too. in Texas this summer, DeAnna, it was a crazy hot summer, hotter than we're used to. We broke numerous records. How do natural disasters and heat waves, like in the summer, how has that altered CPS Energy's approach when it comes to their customers and that level of preparedness for them?
You know, it's interesting. I think very much in line with what Lincoln was talking about. It's thinking about the community as a whole, not thinking about it from the utility perspective, but thinking about what customers want, right? So when you think about their experience, if it's going to be hot, where are they going to go to? Do they know how to get there? Do they know what plans to make? And how do we make sure the other members of our community are prepared for the fact that they might be coming in? So, I mean, it was everything from finding where in this situation, a cooling center over the summer would be, and putting that on our outage map, and then putting a link to the city's information on where customers could go, and then working with the county and saying, okay, now where do we send people from a county perspective? All the suburban cities that we support, same thing, right? It's not just San Antonio, it's San Antonio and the surrounding area. So we have to make sure that we think broadly about that. And that's a lot of people to communicate with. So I think I believe a lot of utilities are out there. Like we've now become the alert as a weatherman. We're like, hey, weather's coming. So just this morning, my text came through from my team that said, hey, DeAnna, weather's coming in CPS. And the community said, hey, we like that. We don't always believe it whenever my app says that your weather's coming, but when CPS says it's coming, I mean, I don't like hearing it because I don't want to be reminded there might be outages, but you're at least telling me. And then as part of that, we link a way for preparedness. What should you have, right? So trying to make sure that we have a checklist for summer, a checklist for winter. But the other thing that we've done is incorporate outreach to stakeholders, and that's everything from council members to key community partners. So whenever we're sending that message to our customers, we're also sending this to our community partners to say, hey, this is coming, this is what we're seeing, enact your plan. And then we've done a lot of the testing on that. So going through and saying, okay, we're in our city's emergency operations center. This is the communication. And part of the communication has to be transparency, and we have to show the community that we're all in it together. So we'll have our CEO stand up there with the city manager, as well as the CEO for SAWS and the CEO for our transportation location. But it's also going that step further to say, how else can we engage with community partners that potentially we haven't engaged with before? So we're working with other community groups to say, how do we help you stand up some potentially a microgrid or something that you can be a resiliency hub in the event that we lose power? If you're here, this is how you can set it up. Let us be there and be your partner with that. So it's identifying the formal partnerships that we already have, and then continuing to find other partnerships so we can help them prepare. God forbid we have another disaster, right? But we're not going to let it go to waste, and let's find, it's almost a spaghetti approach. Every way we can get it out there. What do you need to be prepared? What do you need to know? What do you need to do for your dogs? And then also, what do our community partners need to do?
So it's a lot of things. It's a lot of things to think about. It's not just, oh, we have to do this one set way. So there's probably a lot of creative ways of thinking there. So, which leads me to a question for you, Lincoln. When we're talking about this, recently we just recorded a podcast together a few weeks ago, and there was an earthquake 10 minutes before you got on, which is wild. First, I wouldn't have recorded a podcast after that because I would have been freaked out. But so props to you. But how can we, when we're talking about climate resilience planning, how can we evolve these plans to meet for the changes that we are now experiencing?
Oh my, that's probably a 3-day conference in itself. Yes, there was an earthquake down by San Jose about 10 minutes before we recorded that podcast. Where I was, I didn't feel it, but it was a real wake-up call for us. Not that it affected things on campus, but that we had to shift into gear to see if it might trip over basically tripwires for us in terms of building inspection, in terms of getting everything, getting the hospitals ready, for example. So every single one of those, even if you don't react in action, you're reacting a lot in thought and analysis, a lot behind the scenes. I think, but to the larger question, I see in my own experience, and I think I see in the data, that this is a step change situation. It is not a linear situation. So when we look at planning, you know, I used to be a power resources planner way back when, and we thought of things in pretty linear ways. And I just don't think we can do that anymore. When we're looking at temperature changes, when we're looking at storm activity, you know, precipitation activity, for example, it's going to become less frequent, but it's going to become much more intense, which has implications on infrastructure and stormwater capture and flooding and all sorts of things. I would love for the conversation to shift away from this implicit slope of change. I think the changes are coming in steps, and they're coming in much bigger steps than maybe we allow ourselves as human beings to really get our minds around. But that's the reality, and I would rather overplan on bigger, more frequent steps than underplan on smaller, less frequent steps, let alone some sort of very linear degradation.
With that answer, we have just hit our time, but I will say one thing. Lincoln has now said he will have 3-day conversations with you about this answer on how to plan better. So catch him during lunchtime. Thank you both for participating in our fireside chat today. It was a pleasure having both of you. Until next time.